Karen has full meltdown at pharmacy because prescription isn't ready yet. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. It was a typical afternoon at the chain pharmacy, a quiet lull after the lunchtime rush. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as the constant sound of the automated pill dispensers and occasional rustle of plastic bags filled the space. Behind the counter, Tom, the pharmacist, stood diligently at his station, moving between computers and shelves, double-checking prescriptions, and filling medication orders for customers who had walked in, waiting patiently for their turn. He had been in the business long enough to know that pharmacy work, while essential, was often a thankless job. Patients were rarely in the mood for small talk, and most were too focused on their own schedules to appreciate the level of care and precision involved in dispensing their medications. The pharmacy was bustling with a steady stream of customers, each of them coming and going without incident. But the calm atmosphere quickly shattered when the door to the pharmacy slammed open with a force that caught Tom off guard. He glanced up to see a woman storm in, her face a picture of frustration. Her eyes scanned the room as if she were looking for someone to blame, and before Tom could even speak, she was already marching toward the counter, her steps quick and deliberate. "I've been waiting forever," she shouted, her voice loud enough to turn heads. Her expression was one of sheer indignation, as if the very idea that she might have to wait for something was an intolerable injustice. "I've been here long enough for you to have filled my prescription. What is going on back there?" Her words were punctuated by a loud sigh, as if she believed the whole world should bend to her will, and Tom, in this moment, was simply in her way. Tom was no stranger to difficult customers, but there was something about this woman that felt different. Perhaps it was the urgency in her voice or the way she seemed to believe that everyone else's time was less valuable than her own. He took a breath, maintaining his usual calm demeanor, and walked toward the counter, ready to address whatever issue had arisen. "I'm sorry about the wait, ma'am," Tom said, his voice calm and steady as he met her gaze. "What was the name on the prescription?" "I'll check on the status for you." The woman's eyes narrowed as if she were studying him, deciding whether or not she would allow him to offer an explanation. "It's for Emily Saunders," she snapped. "And I've been waiting here for what feels like forever. I don't know why this is taking so long. I've been to other pharmacies, and they don't take nearly this long to fill a prescription." Tom nodded, his fingers tapping a few keys on his computer to pull up the details. "Let me see here," he said, glancing at the screen. "It looks like the prescription just came through about 12 minutes ago. It's still being processed in the system, and the medication is being prepared now. It shouldn't take too much longer." The woman's face twisted into a look of disbelief, as though she couldn't fathom that 12 minutes could possibly feel like too long to wait. "12 minutes? Are you kidding me?" she shot back, her voice growing louder. "I've been standing here, waiting for what feels like an eternity, and now you're telling me it's only been 12 minutes? I'm supposed to just stand here like some kind of fool while you process it?" Tom's heart rate quickened slightly. He had handled far worse situations before, but there was something about her tone, her complete lack of patience, that made this moment feel a little more intense than usual. He opened his mouth to respond, but the woman cut him off before he could say anything more. "This is ridiculous," she yelled, her face turning a shade of red that made it clear she was spiraling into a full meltdown. "I can't believe I'm being treated like this. I need that prescription, and I need it now. What kind of pharmacy is this, making people wait like this for something so simple?" Tom stood there, trying his best to maintain control over the situation, knowing that it wasn't about the prescription anymore. It was about power, about control, and about the woman's perception that she was somehow being wronged. He tried to keep his voice calm, knowing that responding with anger would only escalate things further. "I understand that this is frustrating," he said, his tone measured but firm. "But we're still processing the prescription, and it's only been 12 minutes since it came through. We're working as quickly as possible to get it ready for you, and I assure you that there's no need for the frustration. I can offer you a seat in the waiting area if you'd like while we finish up. It really won't be much longer." But the woman wasn't interested in hearing any more explanations. She slammed her hands down on the counter, her voice growing even more shrill as she continued her tirade. 12 minutes? 12 minutes? I don't have time for this. I have places to be, and I shouldn't have to stand here waiting like a nobody. What kind of service is this? You're clearly not doing your job, and I am absolutely fed up with this place. People in the pharmacy, who had been trying to mind their own business, began to glance nervously at each other. The atmosphere had shifted from calm and ordinary to one of palpable tension. Several other customers had begun to shift uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that the situation could get worse. Tom felt his shoulders tense as he looked around, but his focus remained on the woman in front of him, trying to keep his composure in the face of her escalating meltdown. "I'm very sorry you're upset," Tom said, his voice still calm but with a slight edge. "I'm doing my best to get your prescription to you as quickly as possible. It's only been 12 minutes, and we're working on it right now. If you'd like to wait a few more minutes, I can assure you it'll be ready very soon." The woman's face twisted in anger. "I don't want to wait a few more minutes. I need it now. And I want you to do something about it. This is absolutely ridiculous, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of terrible service you provide here." At this point, it was clear that logic and reason would not work. The woman had already made up her mind, and she wasn't interested in anything Tom had to say. Her outburst had reached a fever pitch, and the volume of her voice had drawn the attention of everyone in the pharmacy. Tom knew that if this went on any longer, it could create even more of a scene, and that was the last thing he wanted. He looked over his shoulder and nodded toward his colleague in the back, signaling for backup. "Ma'am," Tom said one last time, his voice firm yet controlled, "I'm asking you to please remain calm. Your prescription will be ready shortly, and I can assure you that we are doing everything we can. But if you continue to yell and make a scene, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside." The woman froze for a moment, her eyes flashing with fury. For a brief second, it looked like she might continue her rant, but then, as if some small part of her realized she had taken things too far, she suddenly stood there, seething in silence. Her chest heaved with each breath, and she looked around at the other customers, perhaps aware for the first time that she had drawn far too much attention to herself. After what felt like an eternity, she muttered, "Fine," under her breath, before storming off to the waiting area to cool down, leaving Tom standing at the counter, his shoulders sagging with the release of the tension that had built up in his body. The pharmacy returned to normal, though there was a lingering awkwardness in the air. Tom glanced at his colleague in the back, who gave him a sympathetic nod. It had been a close call, but somehow, he had managed to keep the situation from escalating further. He glanced back at the woman, now sitting in the waiting area, her face still red but silent. He could only hope that her prescription would be ready soon, and that this incident would soon fade from everyone's memory. For Tom, it was just another day in the world of pharmacy, one that had tested his patience, but one that he had survived. The seconds seemed to stretch on forever as Tom watched the woman's face contort with anger. Her frustration was palpable, almost tangible in the air around her. The escalating volume of her voice sliced through the calm hum of the pharmacy, and every sharp, angry word she shouted seemed to punctuate her belief that she was the only one in the room who mattered, the only one who deserved immediate service. Her presence had become a source of unease, an uncomfortable spectacle for the other customers who had been minding their own business before her entrance. Tom could feel the heat of the moment rise, but he refused to allow the situation to spiral out of control. He had dealt with irate customers before, though this one felt different. There was an aggression in her voice, a determination to be heard and validated at any cost, and that kind of anger was unpredictable. "Why is it taking so long? I need that prescription now," she continued, her voice growing higher with each word, the frustration in her tone now fully entwined with an almost frantic sense of urgency. Tom's mind raced, and though he had processed the details of the prescription as quickly as possible, he knew there wasn't much he could do to speed up the process. It wasn't that he didn't want to help her, he did. It was that the prescription had only just come through, and there were other patients who had waited their turn as well. But the woman wasn't listening to reason. She was standing there, hands on the counter, eyes wide with impatience, as though she were challenging him to do something, anything, to resolve her issue in an instant. "I understand you're upset, ma'am," Tom said slowly, his voice deliberately even. But the prescription only came through 12 minutes ago, and it's still being processed. We're working on it, and it shouldn't be much longer. I apologize for the wait, but that's just how the system works. She scoffed loudly, not even letting him finish. 12 minutes? You've got to be kidding me. 12 minutes isn't an acceptable wait time. I've been standing here forever, and this is what you're telling me? That it's only been 12 minutes? Her tone was now more incredulous than anything else, as though she couldn't fathom why anyone might think 12 minutes was reasonable. The woman's face had taken on a deeper shade of red, and her chest was heaving as if she were preparing to unleash yet another tirade. Tom knew that trying to explain any further would likely be futile, so he did his best to keep his tone calm, not wanting to escalate the situation further. I understand that you feel frustrated, but that's the reality of the situation, he said, trying to maintain a professional demeanor despite the simmering heat building within him. We're working as fast as we can, and as soon as your prescription is ready, we'll call you up to the counter. If you'd like, I can check the status again in a few minutes, but I can assure you that it's only been a short wait. I don't care how long it's been, she shouted, her words sharp and biting. I need that prescription. What do you think this is, a joke? You're just standing there telling me it's in process like it's not a big deal. I've got other things to do, and I don't have time to waste waiting for you to do your job. There was something about the way she spoke, as though every syllable was dripping with contempt for the entire system, for Tom, for the other customers who might have been quietly observing this exchange. The words stung more than he cared to admit, but Tom knew that in a situation like this, the goal wasn't to get defensive or engage in a war of words. The goal was to stay calm, diffuse the situation, and get the woman to a place where she might be able to collect herself long enough to realize that her anger was misplaced. Ma'am, I can see that you're upset, but I assure you that we're working as quickly as possible to fill your prescription. I understand that it's frustrating to wait, but there's nothing more I can do at this moment. Tom paused, hoping to bring some sense of calm to the situation, but the woman was already shaking her head, dismissing him entirely as if his words had no weight. Don't tell me there's nothing you can do, she snapped, her voice now at an almost fever pitch. You're the one back there, aren't you? You're the one with the control. If you can't make this happen faster, then maybe you're in the wrong line of work. The venom in her words was sharp, as though each sentence was meant to carve into him, to place the blame for her discontent squarely on his shoulders. She wasn't interested in solutions, she wasn't interested in understanding. She simply wanted to be right, and in her mind, the pharmacy was wrong, and everyone in it was just standing in her way. At that moment, Tom could feel the growing sense of helplessness creeping in. No matter how much he tried to explain, no matter how many times he reassured her that the prescription would be ready soon, she wasn't hearing any of it. The woman was far past the point of listening. She had become completely consumed by her frustration, unwilling to acknowledge that 12 minutes was, in fact, a relatively short wait for a prescription. The other customers, still quietly going about their business, began to glance nervously toward the counter, unsure whether they should intervene or simply try to pretend that nothing was happening. Tom felt the weight of their eyes on him, but he kept his focus on the woman in front of him, doing his best not to let the pressure get to him. I'm going to check again, he said, his voice still even, though there was now an edge of finality to it. He knew that she wouldn't listen to anything he said, but he still felt obligated to make one final attempt. He glanced toward the back where his colleague was filling prescriptions and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, signaling that this situation was getting out of hand. As Tom turned to check the status on the computer, the woman's voice rang out once more, sharper than ever. You know what? She spat. I'm not waiting anymore. I don't care what the system says. I'm going to find somewhere else to fill this prescription, somewhere that actually values my time. The words hit Tom like a blow. She was so wrapped up in her own perception of injustice that she was willing to walk away, even if it meant making herself look irrational in the process. He opened his mouth to respond, but then stopped himself. There was nothing he could say that would make her feel any better at this point. She had made up her mind, and no amount of reasoning would change that. He exhaled sharply, his frustration now starting to seep through despite his best efforts to remain composed. "Ma'am, if you choose to leave, that's your decision," Tom said, his tone firm but with a hint of resignation. "But I would appreciate it if you could keep your voice down so that the other customers aren't disturbed." The woman's eyes flared with indignation, but Tom didn't wait for her response. He had already turned his back to her, focusing on checking the status of her prescription, and in that moment, he realized that there was nothing more he could do. Sometimes, no matter how much you tried to help, people's frustrations were simply beyond reach. And as he stood there, watching the woman storm off in a huff, he couldn't help but feel a quiet relief that, for now, the storm had passed. Tom exhaled a long, controlled breath as he watched the woman storm out of the pharmacy, her exit punctuated by the sound of the door slamming behind her. For a moment, the room was eerily quiet, the tension in the air dissipating as quickly as it had arrived. He glanced around the pharmacy, noting the discomfort on the faces of the other customers, many of whom had been silently observing the chaotic scene. Some of them seemed hesitant to return to their business, unsure if the storm was truly over or if it might reignite at any moment. Tom, however, kept his composure, though inside, his adrenaline was still pumping, a reminder of just how much the situation had escalated in such a short period of time. He knew it was his job to remain calm, but dealing with outbursts like that always left a sting, an unsettling feeling that lingered, despite the outward calm. He turned to his colleague, Marcus, who had been quietly filling prescriptions in the back and had only recently come to the front after hearing the commotion. The look on Marcus's face mirrored Tom's own frustration, slightly weary, yet understanding the nature of the job. Tom raised an eyebrow at him, as if silently asking for reassurance that he hadn't lost his cool completely. Marcus gave a quick nod, a silent acknowledgement of the difficult interaction they had just witnessed. He didn't need to say anything, as the tension from the earlier encounter was still hanging thick in the air. After all, both of them had seen their fair share of difficult customers, but this was different. It wasn't just a matter of an impatient client, it was an eruption of entitlement that had caught them both off guard. Tom's hands were still slightly shaking as he typed the final details of the prescription into the computer system, and he could feel the weight of the woman's words still lingering in his mind. It wasn't the first time someone had been upset about the wait time, it wasn't even the most extreme outburst he'd had to deal with. But there was something about this particular incident that left him feeling unsettled, as if the woman's anger had taken on a life of its own, growing exponentially until it had consumed everything in its path. She had been unreasonable, but it was the way she had wielded her frustration like a weapon that left an imprint on his mind. As the minutes passed, the pharmacy slowly began to return to its usual rhythm. The steady hum of the air conditioning filled the space, and the sound of customers exchanging small pleasantries with the staff replaced the harshness of the earlier confrontation. The occasional beep of the register and the quiet shuffle of paper bags being filled seemed almost soothing in comparison. Still, the remnants of the earlier scene hung in the background, like the aftertaste of a bitter drink. Tom couldn't quite shake the feeling that the woman's meltdown wasn't just an isolated incident, it was part of something larger, a pervasive sense of entitlement that had begun to bleed into everyday interactions. He knew the pharmacy couldn't avoid such outbursts forever, but it made him question how much more of this kind of thing they would be forced to endure. A few minutes later, the phone rang, snapping Tom out of his thoughts. He reached for the receiver, hoping the call would bring some distraction, some relief from the mental fog that had settled over him. As he picked up the phone, he took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever might be on the other end of the line. "Good afternoon, this is Tom at the pharmacy. How can I help you?" he said, his voice professional but still tinged with the residual exhaustion from the confrontation. "Hello, this is Emily Saunders. I just wanted to check on the status of my prescription," the voice on the other end said, calm and polite. It was the woman from earlier, and instantly, Tom's stomach sank. She sounded completely different now, a stark contrast to the aggressive, angry woman who had stormed into the store just moments ago. He had hoped that the issue was truly over, but it seemed like this was far from the end of the matter. "I'm afraid your prescription is still being processed, Emily," Tom said, his voice steady but with an underlying weariness that betrayed his earlier frustration. "It came through a few minutes ago, and the medication is being filled now. It should be ready soon. I apologize for the delay, but we're working on it as quickly as possible." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a brief moment, Tom wondered if she was going to pick up right where she had left off, launching into another tirade. But then, to his surprise, she spoke again, her tone noticeably calmer this time. "I'm sorry about how I acted earlier," she said, her voice softer, more measured. "I don't know what came over me. I guess I just got really frustrated, and it all just kind of boiled over. I shouldn't have yelled at you like that." Tom was taken aback by her sudden change in tone. He had expected an apology of sorts, but he hadn't anticipated such a shift in her demeanor. He had been preparing for a defensive response, perhaps an attempt to justify her behavior, but instead, she was taking responsibility for her actions. It was almost disorienting, the sudden shift from rage to remorse. "I appreciate your apology," Tom said after a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I understand that waiting can be frustrating, especially when you're in a hurry, but I'm glad we could work through it." Emily sighed softly on the other end of the line. "I know. It's just, sometimes I get so caught up in everything, and I forget that people are trying to help. I didn't mean to take it out on you." Tom paused, unsure how to respond. In all his years as a pharmacist, he had never been the recipient of such an honest and self-aware apology. He had dealt with plenty of angry customers, but few had been willing to admit fault and apologize so openly. It caught him off guard, but in a way, it also gave him a sense of closure. He realized that while the encounter had been difficult, it wasn't about the woman's outburst, it was about how both of them had handled the situation afterward. She had chosen to take responsibility for her actions, and that was something rare, something worth acknowledging. "Thank you, Emily," Tom said, his voice a little warmer than before. "I appreciate you calling in and clearing that up. We all have moments when we get frustrated. I understand. Your prescription will be ready shortly. I'll make sure to let you know as soon as it's finished." "Thanks, Tom. I'll be by to pick it up soon," she said, her voice finally sounding more relaxed. "Again, I'm really sorry about earlier. I didn't mean to make things difficult for you." "No problem at all," Tom replied, offering a small, genuine smile to the empty pharmacy as he hung up the phone. As the line went dead, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. The storm had passed, and though it had been a difficult and emotional exchange, it had also ended on a note of understanding. Sometimes, a difficult moment could be a learning experience for everyone involved. And as Tom stood there, breathing in the calm air of the pharmacy, he realized that while he might not have been able to avoid the initial confrontation, he had done his part to bring the situation to a peaceful resolution. That, in the end, was all anyone could hope for. Tom stood at the counter, still processing the unexpected phone call from Emily. Her apology had caught him off guard, but it had also brought a sense of closure that he hadn't realized he needed. The weight of the earlier confrontation had lifted slightly, and as he resumed his tasks, he found that the day was beginning to feel a little more manageable. The soft hum of the pharmacy continued around him, the rhythmic sound of the cash register and the clinking of pill bottles filling the air, creating a sense of normalcy once again. The tension had subsided, and though the incident with Emily had rattled him, he now felt a quiet satisfaction that the situation had at least ended on a positive note, or so he thought. As he was arranging a few prescription bottles on the counter, his phone rang once more. Tom glanced down, expecting to see another customer calling in to check the status of their prescription, but the name on the screen made his heart sink, Emily Saunders. She was calling again. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to expect this time. Maybe she had just wanted to clarify something about her prescription, or perhaps she had changed her mind about something. He had hoped the situation was truly resolved, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. He picked up the phone, bracing himself for whatever might come next. "Hello, this is Tom," he said, keeping his voice calm, despite the slight apprehension building in his chest. "Tom," Emily's voice came through the phone, this time with a noticeably softer tone. "It's Emily again. I just wanted to apologize, again. I've been thinking about the way I acted earlier, and I really feel like I owe you a more heartfelt apology. I know I yelled, and I know it wasn't right, and I don't want you to think that I don't appreciate the work you do. Tom could hear the sincerity in her voice, and though he had already accepted her first apology, hearing this second one made him pause. Emily was taking responsibility for her actions again, acknowledging the impact of her outburst, but this time, there was something deeper, something more vulnerable in her tone. He had expected a brief follow-up to the earlier call, but this felt different, like she was processing her emotions in real time and truly understanding the effect her behavior had on others. "I really didn't mean to make things worse for you," she continued, her voice almost tentative now. "I was just so frustrated, and I know that's no excuse for the way I treated you. I just wanted to let you know that I realize you were just doing your job, and I shouldn't have taken my anger out on you. You didn't deserve that." Tom's shoulders relaxed as he listened, his breath slowly escaping from his lungs in a quiet exhale. It was as if the apology was a release, an acknowledgement of everything that had gone wrong earlier, and he appreciated the courage it took for Emily to call him again, to open up in a way that was honest and vulnerable. Her words carried weight, and he could hear that she truly regretted her actions. In that moment, he understood that the initial outburst wasn't a reflection of who she was as a person, but of her own frustrations with the situation. She had just been caught up in a storm of emotions, and though her anger had been misplaced, she was now genuinely trying to make things right. "You don't need to apologize again, Emily," Tom said, his voice warm and reassuring. "I understand. It's easy to get frustrated, especially when you're in a hurry or dealing with something important. I know that we're all human, and sometimes we act out of emotion. I appreciate you taking the time to call and apologize again. That means a lot." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Tom could almost picture Emily's face as she processed his words. He could imagine the weight lifting from her shoulders, the sense of relief that came with knowing that the person she had wronged was willing to understand and let go of the past. Finally, Emily spoke again, this time with a softness that Tom had not heard before. "Thank you for being so understanding," she said, her voice tinged with gratitude. "You're right. I guess I just needed to hear that. I've been really hard on myself about the way I acted, and I didn't want you to think that I was just some angry, entitled customer. You're right. We're all human." Tom smiled slightly, a feeling of warmth spreading through him as he thought about how rare it was to encounter someone who could reflect so honestly on their own actions. "It's okay," he said. "We all have our moments. What matters is that we can recognize them and learn from them. And I can assure you, your prescription is ready. We'll have it waiting for you when you come to pick it up." There was a brief silence on the other end, and for a moment, Tom wondered if the conversation was over. But then, Emily spoke one more time, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "Thank you, Tom. I really do appreciate your patience, and I'm glad you're still willing to help me. I'll be there to pick it up in a few minutes. And again, I'm sorry for all of the trouble I caused. I'll try to be more patient next time." Tom nodded, even though she couldn't see him. He felt a genuine sense of appreciation for the way Emily had handled herself in the end, and he was reminded once again of the power of empathy, of taking the time to understand someone's frustrations rather than simply reacting in anger. "No problem, Emily," he said, his tone warm and friendly. "We'll see you soon. And don't worry, it's all taken care of now." After the call ended, Tom stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle around him. He looked around the pharmacy, seeing the other customers going about their business, some of them engaged in conversations, others silently waiting for their prescriptions to be filled. The moment of tension had passed, and in its place was an atmosphere of calm once again. Tom felt the weight of the day begin to lift, the exhaustion from dealing with the earlier scene slowly fading into the background. As the minutes ticked by, Emily arrived at the counter, her face still a little flushed but carrying a genuine smile as she approached. She apologized once again, this time in person, for her earlier outburst, and Tom simply smiled and reassured her that it was all in the past. He handed her the prescription, and she thanked him again, more sincerely than before. As she left the pharmacy, Tom watched her walk out the door, feeling a sense of closure settle over him. The incident had been a challenging one, but in the end, it had been resolved with understanding and humility on both sides. Tom returned to his work, his mind clearer now, and as the evening drew on, he realized that sometimes the most difficult moments could lead to the most rewarding outcomes. It was a reminder that patience, empathy, and a willingness to listen could turn even the most difficult situations around. The day had been long, but it had also been a valuable lesson in understanding human nature, and in that, he found a sense of quiet satisfaction.